There's some things that it takes a long time to come back from. Like I've watched people in my clinical practice try to walk back from significant moral errors. It is not that easy. You know, there's that Catholic doctrine that you can be saved and redeemed no matter what your sin. It's like, that's true, but that doesn't mean you don't have to face the consequences of what you've done. And like, if you want to repent and you've done something seriously wrong, so much of you has to change that it's almost like you have to die in order to be reborn. So anyways, for those who are listening, that's another reason why you should try to step forward carefully in your life, you know, because you will be called to attend for your misbehavior, and it will occur during a period of crisis. And if you're a mess and a deceitful mess, you're going to find yourself in trouble so profound you can barely imagine it. You should treat yourself like you're someone responsible for helping. And the first question is, well, why don't you? And the answer is, well, there's a lot wrong with you, you know, and it's hard to exercise enough love and care in a deep and non-naive way to care properly for something like that. It's an encouragement to assume, to act out the proposition that even if life is as difficult as it seems to be, and if you're as vulnerable and weak in a fundamental sense as you definitely are, and characterized by this terrible propensity for the infliction of voluntary suffering on yourself and others, and that destructive tendency, that there's still something within you that's so remarkable and so aligned with order and being in the proper manner that you can climb above that, let's say like Abel, and that you can make the proper sacrifices, and that you can set yourself right, and you can set your family right, and you can set the world right, and that the mere possibility that that might occur, that that might be within the realm of potential, means that you have a moral obligation to exercise the responsibility to take care of yourself as if you're something that matters. And that if you did that properly, it might turn out that what you did would matter, that it would matter to you, that it would be meaningful in the way that things that matter are meaningful, and that it would matter to everyone around you. One of the chapters in my books is focused on putting your house in order. It's like, well, how do you start? Make your bed. You know, it actually took me quite a long time in my life before I made my bed regularly in the morning. Most of my life was in pretty good order, but that was one thing I didn't have in order. My clothes in my closet as well, all that's in order. Not all of it. I'm cleaning out some drawers right now, but look around and see what bugs you in your room. Just look. It's like, okay, I'm in my room. Do I like this room? No, it bugs me. Okay, why? Well, the paint's peeling there, and it's dusty there, and the carpet's dirty, and that corner's kind of ugly, and the light there isn't very good, and my clothes closet's a mess, so I don't even like to open it. Okay, that's a lot of problems. That sucks. That's a lot of opportunity. Pick something and fix it.
Something that bugs you.
Yeah, but not too much. So the rule is pick something that you know would pick a problem. Pick a solution to it that you know would help, that you could do, that you would do. So you have to negotiate with yourself. It's like, well, I won't clean up this room. How do you know? Well, I've been in here for 10 years and I've never cleaned it up. It's like, well, obviously that's too big a dragon for you. Would you clean one drawer? Find out. And so imagine now you want to be happy when you open that drawer and you think, well, that's stupid. It's like, is it? Maybe it's your sock drawer, which I cleaned up in my room the other day, by the way. You're going to open that every morning. Yeah. So that's like 30 seconds of your life every day. Okay, so that's 3 minutes a week. That's 12 minutes a month. That's 2 hours a year. So maybe your life is made out of, you've got 16 hours a day. Let's figure this out. 5, 12 in an hour, 12 in an hour, 144 in 12 hours. Yeah, let's say 200. 200 5-minute chunks. That's your life.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan Peterson did just some math how many 5-minute chunks there are in a day. And I'm pretty sure that's pretty accurate.
It's approximately right. So you got 200 5-minute chunks and they repeat. A lot of them repeat. Mm-hmm. So if you get every one of those right, they're trivial, right? Who cares what my sock drawer looks like? It's like, fair enough, man, but that's your life. The things you repeat every day, the mundane things. Think I could get all those mundane things right. That's the game rules. It's like now all the mundane is in place. Now you can play because all the mundane's in place.
If there's a young man in their 20s listening to this, how do they escape the pull of Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground? With the eyes open to the world, how do they select the adventure?
So there's other characterizations of the divine, say in the Old Testament stories. So one pattern of characterization that I think is really relevant to that question is the conception of God as calling and conscience. Okay, so what does it mean? It's a description of the manner in which your destiny announces itself to you. And I'm using that terminology, and it's distinguishable, say, from Nietzsche's notion that you create your own values. It's like, part of the way you can tell that that's wrong is that you can't voluntarily gerrymander your own interests, right? Like you find some things interesting, and that seems natural and autonomous, and other things you don't find interesting, and you can't really force yourself to be interested in them. Now, so what is the domain of interest that makes itself manifest to you? Well, it's like an autonomous spirit. It's like certain things in your field of perception are illuminated to you. Think, oh, that's interesting, that's compelling, that's gripping. Rudolf Otto, who studied the phenomenology of religious experience, described that as numinous. The thing grips you because you're compelled by it, and maybe it's also somewhat anxiety-provoking. It's the same reaction that like a cat has to a dog when the cat's hair stands on end. That's an awe response. And so there's going to be things in your phenomenological field that pull you forward, compel you. That's like the voice of positive emotion and enthusiasm. Things draw you into the world. Might be love, might be aesthetic interest, it might be friendship, it might be social status, it might be duty and industriousness. Like there's various domains of interest that shine for people. One of the things that I've seen, for example, with my wife is that the periods of time where she gets upset shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink, because she can get from the problem to the verbalizable statement of the problem and the solution way, way faster. But that takes just from continual practice, because continual attention is like, oh, I'm upset. Okay, well, what am I upset about? Here's a bunch of things that I might be upset about. Okay, which of those are focal? Like this is something you can learn, you know, but you have to admit you're upset. And you also have to understand that you don't know why. Because one of the things that'll happen in a marriage with any close relationship, with any relationship is like, well, if you and I talk and we hit a pit, I would rather that it's your fault, right? Because then you have to take the conceptual structure and you have to allow it to die and you have to cry and you have something to learn and it's you and it's an indication that you're insufficient. It's way more convenient for me if it's you. Plus I get to feel moral superior and like I have myself under control and that I've mastered the universe. And also women also in some ways want that from men because they want the men to be competent. And so men will pretend to be more competent than they are. It's like, you want to find out what the problem is because then you can solve it. And one of the things you have to consider is that you're the problem. Maybe you're not, but maybe you are. Now you might say, well, why should you undergo the cataclysmic revelation that you're the problem? And the answer is because you could stop being the problem. Like that's the payoff. Because you might say, well, why attend to your wife? Why fight? And the answer is so you don't have to fight again. See, and I know this, so I'm a very agreeable person. I don't like conflict. Like I'll do almost anything not to paper it over, though. That's the thing, to fix it. But the reason that I'll engage in conflict is because I know it isn't a theory. I know that conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. And so if I do have a problem with someone, I want to note it, get it on the table, fight it through to the bloody bottom, fix it, and move on. And there's that's a lot of emotional stress and complex reconceptualization and retooling. And people would rather avoid that, because you come home from work
and your mind is on something, whatever the hell it is, and then this like snake pops up, and you think, do we really have to deal with this now? It's like, well, maybe. And if not now, when? And that's something you can also negotiate.
You should be careful with your words, because when you use them, you're doing one of two things. You're either creating what's good or you're doing the opposite. And so part of what you do when you go to become educated is to learn to respect the word, yours and others, and to train yourself to use it properly. And that would mean, I would say, honestly. That's the first thing, honestly. And in the service of the highest ethic that you can conceive. And that's the purpose of a humanities education. And then you can think about that practically too, because this is not impractical, quite the contrary. I know no one who hasn't been radically successful who isn't radically expert at communication. And that also means they're radically expert at thought, because mostly we think in words. And when you write, you're learning to think. And when you're using the language that you've strived to master, you are literally generating the present and the past out of the future in the direction you're aiming at. That's what you're doing. That's what consciousness does. And so you want to have respect.
One of the really difficult things to learn when you're down and out is how far you're down, because it's humiliating. You know, I was ill recently, and when I started to recover, I couldn't really button my shirts. I had to learn to do that again. I'd forgotten how to put my hands on keyboard. I didn't know where to put my hands. I had to learn to type again. Now, I hadn't lost all the knowledge, and it came back quite quickly. And the reason I'm saying that is because one of the impediments to people who've really taken a blow in their life is that things have fallen apart around them so badly that where they have to start is humiliating even to consider. The rule, it's a pretty straightforward rule when you want to get back on your feet. And the rule is you have to make the task small enough so that you'll do it, no matter how small that is. You know, and that can, and I've worked with people. I mean, one of the things I've become well known for is my advice to start by cleaning up your room. But I had plenty of clients who couldn't go home and clean up their room. They hadn't cleaned up their room for like 20 years for all sorts of reasons. Maybe because every time they did try to do anything positive in their family, no matter what it was, they were immediately punished and undermined. And so if they even went home and dared to start cleaning up the room, they'd face resistance within the family that was just a manifestation of the 50,000 times they'd been discouraged in the past, but also a move that would upset the insanity that characterized the pattern of familial interactions. And so actually, if they even made a move to clean up their room, what they were doing simultaneously was confronting the dragon in the family that had made every single person in that household insane for like 5 generations, right? So it looks simple. It's not bloody simple. And so in a situation like that, you cut it down so that maybe the first thing they do is clean up, like maybe they look inside one drawer and see the mess that's there and just look at it for a minute and think about how they might reorganize it if they were going to. When people are very down and out and they decide to make a move forward, in some ways they're facing the whole panoply of problems that confront them in the guise of that single problem, right? It's all lurking behind it, right? It's like, you know, they see the tip of a reptile's tail outside a gigantic closet, let's say, and they look and they think, well, that's just the tip of a tail. What harm can it do me? But it's connected to the whole damn beast. And the advantage to that is that if you make that first step forward, you're actually advancing in the face of all that opposition. The disadvantage is that the first task seems so small that you literally have to be on your knees to be humble enough to lower yourself to take that first step. Make a plan that is what you should do, even though it will be what you should do. Make a plan that outlines a future so that you could sit back and say, look, if I had that future, then all the horrible things that are going to happen to me are going to be worthwhile. That's what you want. So you want to think this game is worth playing despite its tragedy. That's what you've got in life. Enough meaning to serve as an antidote to tragedy. All right, now, and then you generate a strategy. And then the other thing you should do if you're not very industrious is discipline yourself. And so what do you do with that? Eat 3 times a day at regular meal times. That's a good thing to practice, because that starts to put some stability into your life. Get up at the same time. I would highly recommend all those young people out there who are listening, like, you want to get a jump on life, get the hell out of bed in the morning. You know, as I've got older, I've got up earlier and earlier. Now, that's partly because you don't need as much sleep, but it's also partly because I've got more and more disciplined. Like, get up early in the morning and get your things done. Man, learn to get up at 6 in the morning and you'll be one deadly creature, especially if you can get to work. You'll have half your damn day done by the time other people haul their sorry asses out of bed. And so that's a massive, massive advantage. Look, Warren Farrell, not the comedian, Warren Farrell, the author, he outlined data in Why Men Earn More, which is a book I would recommend, by the way, showing that if you work 13% longer hours, you make 40% more money. It's nonlinear. So you think, why is that? Well, imagine you had 10 employees and one of them works an extra 10%. It's not much. Well, how often is that person going to be promoted, assuming you have a clue as a boss? It's like you're going to look at the 10 people and you're going to think, oh, that guy's always here like 45 minutes early. It's like, why don't we give him the promotion? Obviously, right? So these small edges that you can manage like that, work an extra 10% or extra 13%, have non-proportional payoffs. That's part of the Pareto distribution. So get your sleep cycle organized so you get up in the morning. Learn how to do it. No excuses. I'm too tired in the morning. I don't like mornings. Who cares? That's not relevant. It's like discipline yourself so you can manage it. Schedule your meals, because that's a good disciplinary routine. And then learn to use a calendar, like Google Calendar. Many of you out there do not use a calendar. Okay, a calendar is not a prison, and it's not a tyrant. Not if you use it properly. A calendar keeps anxiety at bay. It makes sure that you do what you need to do, which is important, because otherwise you fall behind. But if you use it properly, it also helps you plan what you want to do. So I could say, well, lay out your damn calendar and design the days you would like to have. That's what your calendar is for. So you can put in all sorts of things in there you want to do and that would be good for you. And that's a really good way to start being more industrious. Make a plan. You need a plan for 3 years. You need a plan for the next year. You need a plan for the next 6 months. You need a plan for the next 3 months. You need a plan for the week. You need a plan for the day. You need a plan for the hour. All of that. I make lists constantly of what I have to do. And they're like daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. Right now, I can't look out more than about 6 months, because my life is too complicated and chaotic. But you need a vision of who you could be, what character you could have. 3 to 5 years out, you can't go much farther than that because life is too unpredictable, I think, to make vision that's longer term than that subject to. There's too much chance associated with it to spend a lot of time on. Maybe you can stretch it to 5 years, and in rare cases, you can have a 10-year goal, but it has to be pretty low resolution. But you want plans at all those levels of resolution. You want to write the things down. And because what are you going to do? You're going to stumble around and get what you need? You're going to stumble around and be useful to other people? And it's useful to be useful to other people, They want to work with you then. They want to do things with you. They want to have you around. They trust you. They open up opportunities for you. And if you stumble around like you're blind, you're not going to get anywhere. And then you're going to suffer. And then you're going to be bitter. And then you're going to be cruel. So that's hell. That's a bad outcome. So unless you want that, don't aim for it. Or aim for the opposite, because that's how you get out of it.
The biggest challenge to young people is negotiating the transition into adulthood identity. And I think that's partly why we have this terrible war in our culture about what constitutes identity. And I think the reason that identity has become such a problem is that our concepts of identity are unbelievably unsophisticated, narrow, hedonistic, and self-serving. So the identity groups that have popped up are all, you could say, whim-based identity groups. They're sexual identity, say, or something arbitrary like sex or race or ethnicity, something arbitrary. But the sexual identity groups are particularly interesting because the idea that that's your identity is predicated on the notion that there isn't anything more vital to you than the immediacy of your sexual behavior. Well, you're not a sex machine. You're not a short-term sex machine. That's not what a human being is. So if you revert to that, all you're going to do is produce like anxiety, hopelessness, and misery. It's not a good solution. So then you might say, well, what's the solution? And the solution is something called a subsidiary solution. It's like, so what's your identity? Well, you should get your act together and take care of yourself. So you have to integrate yourself. You have to integrate across anxiety and hatred and pain and jealousy and fear and hunger and lust and all that plethora of spirits that wage war within you.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. You have to bring that into a unity, okay? And one of the things Nietzsche said, the famous German philosopher, was that every drive attempts to philosophize in its spirit. So all those subordinate spirits that war inside you will try to dominate. I'm only my anger or rage. That's the protester type, you know. I'm only my sexuality. I'm only my appetite. That's the consumer model. But all that has to be integrated. And then you might say, well, integrated into what? Well, integrated into a structure that serves all of those spirits simultaneously and harmoniously across a long time. That's maturity. Okay, but that doesn't happen in isolation. So then there's stages above that. Okay, so the next thing is maybe you've got your act together enough so that someone can tolerate being around you. So there's enough left over from you so you can play with someone else. So you establish a relationship, marriage, let's say. You invite someone else to join forces with you. You produce a united vision. Okay, so now there's you and there's you as husband. And it's the joint interplay of those that's now your identity. Okay, and so now you have a role and you have obligations and responsibilities and opportunities. You know, you say, well, I'm constrained by my marriage. You know, there's all sorts of things I can't do, which really means I can no longer, in the most primitive way, it means I can no longer immediately gratify my short-term whims. Although it could also be more complex in that I don't get to pursue the things that I need to pursue, which means you haven't negotiated with your wife very well. Like if your marriage is a prison, you're either very immature in what you want or you haven't negotiated properly. If you've done it well, you've got your individual unity established, and then there's a unity within the marriage that's better. And why would it be better? Well, you could learn to love someone, and that would be better because getting outside yourself decreases your anxiety. So we know as psychologists, one of the things that was learned 20 years ago is that there's no difference between thinking about yourself and what you want and being miserable. Those are self-consciousness and negative emotion are so tightly tied together that they're statistically indistinguishable.
People have like they have four fundamental fears. One is fear of their own inadequacy and malevolence. That's a big fear, man. That can really do you in if you confront it accidentally and fully. Happens to soldiers sometimes in battle when they find themselves doing things they can't believe they do. And then we're afraid of society. That would be the oppressive patriarchy, because society judges us harshly and mercilessly in many ways, and we don't like to plummet in the, what would you call it? We don't like to see our reputation savaged in front of the groups that we identify with. It's extraordinarily hard on us emotionally for that to happen, which I wrote about, for example, in Rule 1, which is a chapter, at least in part, that details out the fact that the neurochemical systems that track your comparative status in competence hierarchies also regulate the balance between your positive and negative emotion, such that if you suffer a social defeat, your proclivity to experience negative emotion radically increases, and your proclivity to experience positive emotion radically decreases. And people seriously do not like that. And it's no wonder, because who wants to be completely overwhelmed with sadness and bitterness and anxiety and resentment and disappointment and frustration and grief, and then also devoid of happiness. You know, it's the very definition of hell. And if a status defeat will increase that probability, then we will fight very hard to maintain our status positions, which we certainly do. That's another fear. And then, of course, we have the fear of nature, and we should, because, of course, nature, despite being the environment and this thing that we should be striving to protect and maintain, is also trying with all of its might constantly to make us ill and old and kill us, and is generally very successful at all three. And so there's every reason to be afraid of nature. And, you know, one night alone in the bush will pretty much convince you of that. And then people are also afraid of the unknown. And so those are the big categories of terror that human beings face. And to be naked on stage is to face at least 2 or 3 of those simultaneously.
If you don't have some notion of the divine, then you'll believe any damn thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's right.
And that's what the kids are doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dostoevsky's comment on that was, if there's no God, everything is permitted. You know, and he did a lovely job of analyzing that in Crime and Punishment and The Brothers Karamazov. And I think it's true. I think if you believe nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I really do believe that's the case. And, you know, you might say, well, what do you mean? You mentioned earlier that people like to ask me if I believe in God. And I always think, well, who are you to be asking that question? First of all, you have some notion of what you mean by believe that you think is just accurate because you know what believe means. And so you have a priori theory about belief. And now you're asking me if my belief in God fits into your a priori theory. It's how about we start by questioning your a priori theory of belief? Because I don't even know what you mean by believe, and neither do you. Especially when we're asking a question that profound. Because, you know, do you believe in God? There's 2 mysteries there. Well, 3. You believe God. All 3 of those are subject to question. I think people act out what they believe. And so when people ask me if I believe in God, I say generally that I act as if God exists, or I try to act as if God exists. And they're not very happy about that because they want me to abide by the implicit rules of their question, which is, no, do you believe in the religious view as a pseudoscientific description of the structure of reality? It's like, well, I don't even know how to answer that question because it's so badly formulated I can't get a handle on it. Do you believe that there's something divine? Well, let's try to define divine. Here, we can do that for a moment. Most of us have some sense that literary stories differ in their depth. I don't think that's an unwarranted proposition. Some stories are shallow and some stories are deep. Some stories are ephemeral and some move you deeply. Whatever that means, it's a metaphor, but we understand what it means. Imagine there are layers of literary depth. And one way of conceptualizing the layers of literary depth is that the deeper an idea is, the more other ideas depend on it. Right? And so you have fundamental ideas that are fundamental because if you shake that idea, you shake all the ideas that are dependent on them. And then I would say, well, the realm of the divine is the realm of the most fundamental ideas. And you don't get to believe in that or not, because the alternative is to say, well, all ideas are equal in value. It's like, okay, well, try acting then. And you can't, because you can't act unless you prioritize your beliefs. And if you prioritize them, you arrange them into a hierarchy. And if you arrange them into a hierarchy, you accept the notion of depth. And so that's a no-go. When we use language of the divine, we're talking about the deepest ideas. And so I believe that the notion that each individual is characterized by a consciousness that transforms the horizon of the future into the present, that's a divine idea. It's so deep. And our cultures necessarily, I think functional cultures are necessarily predicated on that idea. So I don't just think it's a Western idea. I don't think you can have a functional culture that in some sense doesn't instantiate that idea, because you interfere with the mechanism of adaptation itself by not allowing it free expression.
You know, and you can be like my prime minister and you can say, well, I really admire the Chinese Communist Party because when it comes to environmental issues, they get things done. And I think I couldn't begin to tell you how many things are wrong with that statement. It would take like 15 years to tell you why you're an inexcusably narcissistic idiot. But we can start like simply. If you know what you're doing and you have power, if you know what you're doing, maybe you can be more efficient in your exercise in your control over movement towards that goal. Let's just assume for a minute that you do know what you're doing. Well, maybe if you have power, then you're efficient. Fair enough, man. What about when you don't know what you're doing? How about then? Where do you turn? Because what that means is your ideology failed you. And do you have a mechanism for operating when you don't know what you're doing? Well, no, because we always know what we're doing because we're totalitarian and we have a complete theory of everything and don't say anything to the contrary or else. We've got it all wrapped up. Yeah, except when you don't. And so what do we do in free societies when we don't know what we're doing? Well, we let people talk. And out of that babble, out of that noise, and American culture is particularly remarkable in this regard, you have this immense diversity of opinions, most of which are completely useless, and some of which are absolutely redemptive. And one of the things that's so remarkable as a Canadian observing your culture in particular is that, you know, you guys veer off in weird directions fairly frequently and things look pretty unstable, and then there's some glimmer of hope somewhere that bursts forward in a whole new mode of adaptation, and away you go again. And that just happens over and over and over. And that's a consequence of real diversity. And it's definitely a consequence of like freedom of association and freedom of speech, because it enables all that.